Welcome to the Lift Your Story podcast with guest Terry McDougall. Hi everyone, I am that gal. I'm Lorianne from Milton, Ontario, Canada, and I am with...
I am that guy. I am Roy Miller from Dallas, Texas, and we'd like to welcome you to our Lift Your Story podcast.
So in this episode, we're pleased to we have Terry McDougall, and she is the executive and career coach and CEO of Terry B. McDougall Coaching. Thank you for being with us today.
Yes, thank you.
Well, great to be here, Lorianne and Roy.
So, according to your bio, you're a corporate dropout, right?
Yep. I don't think I wrote it that way in my bio, but yes, you're absolutely right.
So, tell us something interesting about you.
Well, one thing that's a little unusual about me is that before age 11, I lived in 40 different places with my family.
That's crazy. That's amazing.
So, a lot of places.
It is a lot.
Then we have to ask, why?
You know, my parents got married very young, and I think that they were very keen to, be as successful as they could be. And my dad got a job with the telephone company, AT&T. And I think that he agreed to take on this type of work because I think it paid better and there were more opportunities. He worked on these work crews. He's a blue collar kind of guy. He was a welder and a splicer and very electrician, that kind of thing. And he was on these work crews that were traveling throughout the Southeast, burying the long distance cables in the 60s. Because, it used to be that they were all strung from telephone poles everywhere. But the telephone company decided that, it makes sense to bury these for many reasons. And so he was on the work crews that were doing that. And when they would get done with one project, maybe they'd be there for 6 weeks or 2 months, the phone company would send that crew to another place. And sometimes it might be the next town, and sometimes it might be 2 or 3 states away. And so we lived in a trailer home that my dad would hook up to the back of his pickup truck and we'd go on to the next place.
Yeah, I worked in construction, so when work was slow in Dallas, I would have to travel other places to work. Sometimes I was there for month, 2 or 3 months at a time. Other times I was there and come home on the weekends. It just depends. So, yeah, but
that's just how it was with my dad too. And whenever I got into school, my parents made it so that we would be there for a year. We'd be there for the school year. But a lot of times my dad might have to be away for a week or two at a time, depending on where they sent him to work on. I remember at one point he was doing something in New York. And I remember him talking about like laying these cables through one of the tunnels and like the lights going off in the tunnel, and it would be in pitch black, right? Because you're totally under the water. But when he was working on that project, he'd come home. We lived in Ohio, and he'd come home every other weekend. Mm-hmm. So we didn't see him a lot.
So do you feel some of your childhood and how you grew up has brought you to where you are today and what you're doing today?
Yeah, I think in a roundabout way. I mean, I've always been somebody who has been interested in change. And I like variety and I like new things. And I think it definitely goes back to being a kid and living in so many different places and having to adapt to new situations all the time. And, I guess I kind of got a taste for it and I just liked it. I like that kind of stimulation. For a lot of people, they would prefer things stay the same. But for me, that seems very boring. And I suppose because I have had to adapt to so many situations that as a coach, I have, supreme faith that people can change because I've had to do it and I've seen it happen many, many times. As long as you get a clear vision of the thing that you want and you put a plan in place, you can make it happen.
Yeah. So you've also written a book.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about your book?
Yeah, my book is called Winning the Game of Work, Career Happiness and Success on Your Own Terms. And, the book is really, it's maybe one part memoir, definitely a lot of lessons that I learned in my career in terms of either falling on my face and telling those lessons that I learned the hard way, I also share a lot of wisdom that I got from mentors and coaches that I had along the way. And then I interviewed about, I think, 11 people for the book about their careers. I was always a very ambitious person and I suppose maybe part of it comes from my childhood too, moving around a lot. I think I just instinctively wanted a little more control in my life. And I think the way that I thought that I would get that is by being successful professionally. So I was always sort of striving, but yet coming from a blue collar background, I didn't really have anybody that could guide me on like, hey, this is what you do to be successful in the corporate world. So I was always reading a lot of books, just observing. And it took me a long time to kind of realize that the rules that I did well by in school didn't translate to the workplace. If you try to use the, keep your head down, do your work, be quiet, raise your hand, that doesn't work as well in the corporate world. And it took me a while to figure that out. But once I did, I really wanted to share it with other people. And I at first did that by mentoring and coaching people that reported to me. And then I actually had people that would ask me to mentor them. And I got to kind of a crossroads at my last job where I didn't really love the job that I was in. I'd been in the company for 12 years and I was really thinking, okay, what's next for me? What do I want to do? And I did took the advice that a lot of people will give. And in fact, I give to my clients, which is, what do you like to do and what are you good at? And when I started thinking about that, I thought, I love helping people. I love helping people be successful. And I actually really like business as well, but sometimes it can get a little tiring, having to deal with some of the red tape and bureaucracy in big companies. And so I now bring my 30 years of experience in the corporate world to bear with my coach training, and I'm helping people who are in the workplace become more successful and happier. Importantly, happier.
And it sounds like too with that, like you were saying, you can also help them with the changes and how to deal with the changes, which is really important. Yeah. Not a lot of people like it. They know it's absolutely necessary, but it's not the easiest thing to deal with.
It's scary. Change is scary. I mean, it's scary for me sometimes too, but I've been through it so many times that, it's funny because there are like these change management consultants, right? That companies will hire to take them through the changes. And I actually had a client who was a change management consultant, and he shared a couple of models with me that they use in change management. And it was really interesting to kind of look at some of the change that I've been through in my life through the lens of some of the models. And there is a process that we all have to go through if we're going to accept change. And if you can help people recognize where they are and have the courage to take that next step, and then the next step and the next step, they'll eventually get there. But sometimes I think that, it can be a situation where nobody's helping them take those baby steps. They're like, okay, you're on the cliffs of Acapulco, take a big swan dive. I wasn't saying that very clearly, but, and that's scary, right? But if you're, just putting your toe in the baby end of the pool, that's a lot more acceptable, right? You can say, okay, I have enough courage to do that.
Yeah, my wife worked for the government, and they were under the Department of Defense. And then every so often, a new general would take over, and then they would make a total change to everything, and then everything would be all new. And then after a period, a new general would come in. He would change it back the way it was the old way. And it was just, and she worked there 38 years. It was just continuous ABC, 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 ABC,
I've seen it, and I always thought that it was interesting when somebody new would come in, why they'd have to upset the apple cart. But I think that in many cases, they kind of feel like they want to make their mark, right? They don't care if what was there before worked. They're like, hey, how will people know I was here unless I make my mark? It was hard for me in the beginning, but after working for 30 years, after a while, you're like, oh, here it comes again, right? The pendulum is swinging in the opposite direction.
Well, I worked for a guy, and he was afraid to change anything, because if it didn't work, he didn't want corporate to say, well, Mike, why did you do that? It's worked the last 25 years. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
although there were a lot of things that could have been improved, he was just afraid as a manager of it not working and him being blamed for it.
Yeah. Yeah. He was kind of risk averse, I guess. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are those times, though, I know that I went through, I was actually only there for about a year and a half before they basically cleared house and brought a whole bunch of new people in.
Mm-hmm.
And let me tell you the stress that goes on in there, because you keep wondering, am I the next one on that list to go?
Yeah.
And luckily they kept me on because I smiled. That was actually one of the reasons, because I was at the forefront, and they said, we noticed this, and I greeted the new person who I didn't know, but was my manager. But in this particular case, it made sense. The company needed to make more money, and then of course they say, well, you're just a number, but people have to understand that, without the profits, there is no business, there's no jobs,
right?
There was a necessity for it. But that stress was more than I could say. And
it's very hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've gone through, I worked in financial services, and there's been a tremendous amount of, mergers and acquisitions in that arena. And I've gone through many, many mergers and acquisitions. And, every time that they do that, a lot of times there's overlap between the company that they bought or they merged with. And it is very stressful to wonder, like, is my head on the chopping block? But actually, I mean, it's funny, because I guess having gone through it so many times, and I saw colleagues that, got the severance package, a lot of times they were happier, and I got to a point where I was like, hey, what do I have to do to get one of those?
Yeah.
Because I kept surviving, and sometimes when it's stressful, you're kind of like, man, I might like to have one of those. Can you show me the exit?
Well, they probably want to change. They're just afraid to change. But then once somebody forces them to change, they're going, I should have done it 5 years ago, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I think that a lot of times the things that we fear the most, they're not as bad once they actually happen. And, I can tell you that as a coach, I coach people to be more effective in their roles, but I also do outplacement coaching, which is when somebody gets laid off, and the company will pay for a coach to work with them to help them get a new job. And, so often I'm talking to people within a few days of them losing their job, or getting the news that they're going to lose their job. And of course it's shocking and it's scary when they first get the news, but they go through that process and get another job. And a lot of times the job that they get, it's the transition period can be very uncomfortable, and there's a lot of fear that can be involved in that. But I've seen many people get better jobs and be much happier after they've gone through that. And to your point, Roy, that a lot of times people are, they just hold on to something that seems good enough. And, we probably heard that saying that, good is the enemy of the great, right? That sometimes we don't go after something that could be a lot better for us because we're like, well, this is good enough, right?
Well, I know for me, when I was starting out, every year we had to change companies, and so in my 4 years of schooling, that was a good thing, because otherwise I would have went to work for one company. I guarantee you I would have never left, no matter how bad they treated me. I would have stayed there, busted my butt for probably less money than I should have.
Yeah.
I would have been afraid to change. But after my 4 years, hey, I don't care. No big deal for me. I quit more jobs than most people. But anyway.
Now, I had a question with that, because I was going to ask you, in fact, if you ever dealt with people who ended up with a severance package. Now, I would imagine, being the coach that you are, that if they decided to take the leap into owning their own business, you would be there to help them out as well.
Yeah. I mean, as a matter of fact, I'm working with a client right now who he actually lost his job last year, and he's just been sort of contemplating what he wants to do next, and is considering a few different options, including business ownership. And we're just kind of working through his options right now. But yeah, I have, I'm not a franchise consultant or anything. There's plenty of people out there that do that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, I would help people figure out what's next for them. Because quite frankly, the process of figuring out what's next, whether it's another job or it's owning your own business, or even if it's retiring, it's pretty much the same. We go through the same processes. I will always recommend that people find someone that's doing the thing that they think would be interesting, and interview them, find out what's it really like. Because way too often we can look at something and we can idealize it and think like, oh, well, being an entrepreneur, that must be so great to be your own boss. And, the reality is that when you're an entrepreneur, you don't get that direct deposit in your bank account every 2 weeks, strangely enough. Some months you might make lots of money, and then the next month you might not make any money. And it takes a certain kind of person to deal with that. But it's, there's a lot of great things about being an entrepreneur too. You do have a lot of flexibility. You are your own boss. Although I've been on some other podcasts where we've joked about the fact that sometimes the worst boss that you ever have could be yourself.
It's the truth.
Well, yeah, I mean, there was, when I had my company, there was not only weeks, it was months. I didn't take his paycheck. I was hoping I could pay my employees and pay the bills.
Yeah.
And that 40-hour work week is out the window. It was 24/7, 365.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. You got to get the stuff done. It's nice because you can take the time off if you want to, but I'm very often, maybe I'm sitting with my husband watching TV, but I got my laptop and I'm doing work at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's really, seriously, when you have a business, it's like having two families. You've got your family, you've got the other family, because like Roy, I had my auto repair shop, and I know when things were growing tough, I had not only my employees be my children, so to speak, but they had children, and they had mortgages, and you have to take care of your people. So that's
a lot of responsibility.
It really is. When you think about it, as them and their families. Yep. I'm responsible for these families. Yeah. Mm-hmm. When that first hits you, it's really, really tough.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I have been working with a business owner over the course of COVID, and she doesn't really have a right-hand person, right? It's her, and then it's a lot of like kind of junior people that work within her company, and it's a lot of stress. I mean, this has been a very stressful time during COVID too, where she actually has like a studio where people come in and help with the manufacturing of the thing that she does. And, with COVID, it's just been so hard with the social distancing and, people on her staff getting COVID and not being able to come to work. And it's very, very stressful. So I'm just kind of relating to what you're talking about with that feeling of burden, right? Because you got to keep the business going. And, sometimes you can't really rely on the people on your staff during this time because maybe they're ill or they're caring for somebody who's ill. It's been a tough time.
I think a while ago you said you asked people, what are you good at? And what do you like
and what do you like to do?
Okay. Yeah. So when you ask people those questions, how many people say, I really don't know? or I'm not really good at anything.
You know what? I think that I tend to work with these, high achieving people, and usually they're good at a lot of stuff. They don't often like everything that they're good at.
Yeah.
And that can be the source of a lot of unhappiness for people, like why they're not happy with their job. Because, well, I'm good at this. I'm just going to do it because I make money doing it, but they don't really like it. And so I think that it makes sense. I mean, obviously we can't all go back and start over, but if somebody is listening who is just getting ready to start their career, I think it's well worth spending the time there's a book that somebody gave me when I first got out of college called What Color's Your Parachute? And It's got a lot of exercises in it to help you discover what are you good at? What do you like to do? What's your why? Why do you want to work in a particular area? If the answer is to the why is because I want to make a lot of money, I would think twice about that, because a lot of times if you go into a career only because you think you can make a lot of money doing it, you may be successful at it, and that actually could be the worst thing that ever happens to you, because you can get to a point where you make too much money and you don't like doing it. And then what are you going to do? Your lifestyle is based on that income, and you're too far along to make a pivot to do something that you like better. You can pretty much make money doing anything. But you're going to be happier on a path that is more aligned with who you are and the things that you like to do, and whether you're going to be able to bring your strengths to work every day and use those.
Yeah, it's funny because I knew a guy, he's an attorney, but his dad was an attorney. He said his dad used to always take him and, he'd go to the office, his dad always talked to him. So he thought, I don't want to be an attorney, Dad. And he said, what do you want to do? He says, well, I want to be a doctor. And he could have been either one, right? So his dad says, okay, go with my buddy, go see him, follow him around for a while, And so he did this kind of the same thing he did with his dad. And he came back, he said, law school's looking pretty good.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that was smart. That was smart. Yeah, because we can idealize what that really looks like, and then you go and you're like, oh, one of the things that in my career as a marketer, I always had event people under me, event planners, because I worked in the B2B area. And so we did a lot of, cocktail parties, golf outings, conferences and that kind of stuff. And I would often have, young women getting out of college want to come and do an informational interview with me about like, oh, I want to be an event planner. And from the outside, that looks really glamorous. But the reality of it, like, yes, you get to go to South Beach, Miami, or you get to go to, these really great resorts and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is that you're in a windowless room stuffing gift bags or, you're stuck at the registration desk while people are coming in and you're registering them, and you're going to be working from probably like 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning till midnight every night. And probably the most that you'll see of that place is the ride from the airport to the hotel. And it's very, very hard work. And so I think for anybody that thinks that it's going to be like this jet setting, believe me, I had lots of people that worked on teams that they absolutely love it. They love, making these big things happen. But anybody who thinks that it's going to be like, oh, I'm going to be dressing in fancy clothes and, hobnobbing with millionaires, you're not going to the party, you're planning the party. And that might mean you're taking the trash out in your high heels.
It's funny you say that, because our company I work for, we had a golf tournament every year. And at first, we were the ones putting all this golf towels in these bags and all this stuff. We were doing all the registration. Finally, he hired somebody to put all the stuff together. We go out there, we would do registration. Then my wife and I would go sit at the hole-in-one hole. So if you got a hole-in-one, you won a car. That's how we spend every golf tournament.
Just hanging out at the hole-in-one.
Yeah. So
just to verify, right?
Yeah. No glamour there.
Did anybody ever win that one?
Nope.
Yeah.
I was hopeful. That would have been great if somebody did, though.
Yeah,
it would be a perfect spot.
It'd been really neat, but yeah, that sounds a lot better than doing it,
Yeah. I think sometimes people just see the facade of a particular profession and think like, oh, that looks like lots of fun. And I'm always like, yeah, talk with somebody who's doing it to find out. Because actually, I think the flip side of that is when I was in college, I majored in economics, and that would actually be a really great background for banking. But when I was 22, that seemed like the most boring thing in the world for me. I never wanted to work in financial services. But once I was married and my husband and I had an MBA, my husband and I were thinking about like, okay, what's next? I wanted to kind of like move up in my career. A friend of mine worked at a bank, and he said, oh, they're looking for people in the marketing department. And, of course, my values had kind of shifted a little bit more towards not what's the most exciting thing. But once I got into financial services, I realized it actually was really, really interesting. I mean, I did it for 21 years, but from the beginning, I didn't think it looked interesting at all. And maybe had I talked to somebody that did marketing within financial services, I would have been like, oh, well, there's a lot more to it than what I thought there was. But I just didn't know.
Yeah. Everything always looks good from the outside.
Or it doesn't look good. And it might actually be really interesting.
Yeah. Because I know in my career, I was in construction, my career, and I can, to me, a job site's a job site. They're all the same to me. But you hear people go, "Oh wow, I could do that. I could do this in my house. I could fix this. I could fix that." And I'd say, look, you're watching a professional that does this every day, day in, day out.
Right.
He knows all the tricks. He knows all the secrets. Has all the tools. He makes it look easy because he knows what he's doing.
Right.
Believe me when I tell you, it's not that easy when you go try to do it at home.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, it's. I think the funny thing about that is, and I'm sure that a professional could come into a situation and be like, know exactly what the pitfalls are, what they need to check for, etc. And the amateur is going to come and be like, I'm just going to get started. Yeah. And they'll do it. And then they end up having to have a professional come in and fix it. And they end up having to pay twice as much.
Exactly. That's exactly what happens.
Fix the mistake that you made trying to do it, and then you have to fix it twice as much. Yeah,
totally.
Yeah. So
that's what happens when you've got YouTube and Google.
Right, it's so true.
Yeah,
well,
I can prior to
that. I can tell you as a marketer, this is something that I had to deal with a lot in the organizations I worked in too, because, people they're surrounded by marketing, right? Like they're seeing advertising on TV and in magazines and online. And so people will come and say, hey, I have a great headline for you. Why don't you use this in one of our ads? I'm like, I'm a professional in this, I know how to do this. And you're certainly, they certainly are allowed to have their opinions, but there's a lot more to it than, us marketers don't just pull things out of thin air and say, oh, this is the great idea that I have for our next ad campaign. But, people just think like, oh, well, I've consumed a lot of marketing, so therefore I must know how to do it too.
Yeah. I saw, I are a marketer.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. That's funny.
So, Terry, how can our listeners reach out to you?
Well, they can reach out to me on my website. It's terrybmcdougall.com. I'm also active on LinkedIn, and my handle on LinkedIn is also Terry B. McDougall. And then I've got a podcast, which is called Marketing Mambo, and it's where I talk with, I chat with marketing movers and shakers from around the globe. And you can check that out at marketingmambo.net. And then finally, my book, Winning the Game of Work, is available on Amazon and also Barnes & Noble.
Cool.
Perfect.
Great.
Yes, I just want to say to the listeners, I did watch the Marketing Mambo. It's good. I enjoyed it. I like the name of it too. Very nice.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, it is a good name.
Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
I really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for having me.
It was really a pleasure to meet you, Terry.
Absolutely.
Great to meet you, Roy and Lorianne. Really appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Be sure to visit us at lifterstory.com.